respond to your question, like, it's not that these people are not talking about sex. These people are talking about sex. You need to understand those codes that they are using. You know? Because वही फुको भी बोल रहा होता है कि लैंग्वेज में हम कैसी बातें रखते हैं. It's like through ages, again, you need to understand language as a symbol. It's not that we have, it's already there. We learned it. We learned those symbols that are already there. Similarly, उनके language में भी symbols होते हैं. When you start interacting with them, you get to know about it. अब home spaces की बात ले लेते हैं. When you are in your homes, it's not that, females, like generally, it's like also how feminist writing started and people started, it's not that, and this is Virginia Woolf saying, and it's not that women were not talking about sex and sexuality. They were talking about it. And Virginia Woolf, in her writing, A Room for Her One Zone, she's saying about this. It was the kitchen space where they were talking about it. And there were codes that were, and women learned it in the kitchen spaces. So similarly, the spaces where you are interacting, you need to understand the codes, and you need to, also we are remodifying language all the time. So you need to modify the language. That's what you as a researcher, you as an, person who is going to intervene in that space, you need to do.
जैसे इसमें भी कई सारे एग्जांपल्स हैं. फॉर एग्जांपल आप घर पे जाएंगे, उनसे पूछेंगे कि अगर हम फॉर एग्जांपल मैं किसी लड़की को अपनी शादी के लिए देखने जा रहा हूँ, तो वो हो सकता है कि वो पूछ सके हाँ भी आपकी हिस्ट्री क्या है, मतलब आपकी कितनी गर्लफ्रेंड्स रही हैं या नहीं रही. और तो जनरली हम ये मान के चलते हैं, ऐसा देखा भी जाता है कि गांव में अगर होता है कि हाँ अगर आपकी कोई गर्लफ्रेंड नहीं है तो आप प्रेफरेंस में रहेंगे, अगर उस सेंस में. और वही अगर आप शहर में बात करें तो उसमें क्या है कि आपको पूरी हिस्ट्री बतानी पड़ती है कि कितनी गर्लफ्रेंड्स रही हैं या नहीं रही हैं, क्या रिलेशन रहा है. तो वो एक नज़रिया है. दूसरा चीज़ जैसे शहर में हम देखते हैं कि हमारे जो अंडरवियर्स प्राइवेट्स जो हैं कपड़े हैं वो ओपनली सुखाए जाते हैं कि जो कोई ऑब्जेक्शन नहीं, क्योंकि एक तरह की अंडरस्टैंडिंग है. बट गाँव में हम देखेंगे प्राइवेट आपको कहीं नहीं मिलेगा, वो मिलेगा ही.
Then that's where your intervention is. You need to start doing it. You need to ask. You need to make your women in the house, your men in the house to वो सुखाने के लिए डालना पड़ेगा. क्या आप लोग डालो? क्या प्रॉब्लम है? क्या दिक्कत है? It's something with.
Yes, add something to what she says. It's about very homosocial activity that we see can also be interpreted, or whether we have to misread of what Shobhini Ghosh talks about, misreading the concept. So I think that is what she also that normally is interpreted in a manner that is very political in nature.
Yes, your intervention.
Might not be visible in their eyes, but you have to understand the nuances of it.
A lot of scholars, not just Shobhini Ghosh, a lot of scholars have been doing
I
this.
particularly read Shobhini Ghosh.
In between messages, in between the lines.
Lines,
Yeah.
Is he talking about how through not speaking about your sexuality, it gets easier? I did not really get his point, but I was thinking of.
This incident, this film Fire, in which Shabana Azmi, and I'm just quoting directly from what I have read for Madhuri Menon and someone.
Madhuri Menon, yes, Madhuri.
Yeah. So in that way, the act of just massaging a feet can also, it's a form of seduction for both of these females who are in that. That's a very homosocial activity, a very normal activity, but still it's interpreted in a manner once you have to look into it. So that's what I think. Seemingly similar, seemingly normal, acts can also be very political and
And because they are also seemingly normal, so that also gives us a space to hide. What is the reading that you read along with the discussion around fire? What is the name of the author?
With fire.
Yeah. This on the feminism. Okay, I forgot the name. But the point was that because it's homosexuality, especially lesbianism, is such a hush-hush topic in our Indian society, that gives us a space to perform homosexuality in an easier way. So if say in our Indian society, if two men are holding hands, two women are holding hands, we do not really think much about it. It could be a big deal in different societies. So that is also in a way where this kind of, should we call it repression, is also a way to freedom for people, because they don't even get noticed. People don't even bat an eye when two men are living together, when two women are living together. So that could be, I don't know if it connects.
And he talks about there's a different trajectory of medical knowledge production and sexuality. So any observation or any comment on that? How is Foucault talking about sexuality being constructed through medical discourse? Religion में तो they clearly use the idea of guilt and sin. कि आपने कुछ भी किया है तो आपने guilt है, तो बहुत सारा they play upon the idea of guilt and confession. और वो आज भी है हमारे अंदर, फैमिली में, सोसाइटी में हमारे अंदर है कि 18 से पहले सेक्स करने का अलग गिल्ट है, मास्टरबेशन का अलग गिल्ट है, बहुत सारी चीज़ों का गिल्ट है, कैरीज ऑन. वो कम कहीं ना कहीं रिलीजन से आता है, बट मेडिकल नॉलेज प्रोडक्शन, मेडिकल डिस्कोर्स और सेक्सुअलिटी का क्या लिंक है?
It's basically genitalia.
Genitalia.
Yeah. Which is defining the sex in the medical discourse. That's where
like अभी तो like say for example Indian Psychiatric Association अभी उन्होंने finally बोल दिया है few years back I think that homosexuality is not a disease.
Conversion therapies are
banned and all those things, but उससे पहले it was so before that it was considered it's a form of disease. So that's how, say for example, in a way psychiatric knowledge production is sort of constructing a truth about sexuality, a particular truth about sexuality कि ये disease है, homosexuality is a disease. That is them doing, but now they have of course changed over the period, and a new kind of knowledge production in being produced, which is that it is not a disease. I was going to say something. Another way, which is very interesting thing, how many of you go to gym? If you have a private instructor, all of them will tell you, the private instructors will tell you, don't masturbate. Because apparently you are whatever,
sportsman or
throwing away all your testosterone, so which is not good for bodybuilding. So you need to preserve it. And I was recently watching this video by a doctor who is saying that it's completely bullshit. So how they are also producing a particular knowledge about sexuality, and then there is medical discourse who is producing or saying that this is not right, this is not correct.
basically trying to put into the hetero domain of also understanding how body is. So then looking at only two forms of genitalia. So intersex does not exist. So one has to get those, things. It's a form of disease also.
And they also, of course, reproduce, reiterate what's legitimate and illegitimate sex. Like another example in the present context that I was thinking about is like when you go to a gynecologist, she asks, "Are you married?" Not are you sexually active? Are you married? So what does it mean? She cannot even imagine this premarital sex is even possible. That's even a thing. So that was pushed under the carpet. So this gives a good
I think in order to understand this, you have to read Freud, Sigmund Freud. Because if you want to understand Foucault, then you have to read about the conversation between Freud and Foucault.
I mean, in this book, he starts with critiquing Foucault.
Yes, that's what. A lot of feminists did that. They rather took Lacan into consideration, into thinking about the real altogether. So it's a different trajectory. So that's what Foucault is critiquing throughout Freud and this.
Just not Freud, but also the people who talked about this whole repressive, that it was repressed. There were other scholars. I mean, Wilhelm Reich.
Reich is one.
And he mentions Reich as well.
Yes, in the first few pages.
So all these people who were talking at that time about, okay, in the 17th century onward, there has been repression. And that is why, again, going back to the question, that Foucault is fantastic for understanding methodology, because वो सवाल ही वो बोलते कि आप तो सवाल ही गलत पूछ रहे हो, जवाब दूसरी, आप पहले सवाल सही पूछो. तो वो सवाल पूछने का ही नजरिया बदलता है. He asks a different question altogether. And it is fantastic for research, because when a lot of you will go into research and you will come up with your source, you will see that आपका ना एक preconceived notion होता है research को लेके, अपने source को लेके, and that will dominate. तब आपको वो सवाल पूछना पड़ेगा कि क्या मैं जो सवाल पूछ रहा हूँ सही सवाल है कि नहीं. मैंने अपने एमफिल में आई वेंट टू द फील्ड एंड माय कंक्लूजन वाज अबाउट रीचिंग द राइट क्वेश्चन. So my PhD is asking the right question. My MPhil is going to ask the right question. So yeah.
That's a good process.
Just to open up this discussion further, किसी ने critique of Foucault जितना बहुत पढ़ा है समझा है कुछ, do you have any objection कुछ critique है उसका? Or are we like fan कि सब बात करेंगे कि नहीं सही है जो बोल रहा है सही है?
Even if you
There must
haven't
be some
read,
critique.
even if you
not
whatever
read,
you have
what do you
understood from the
have
discussion, do you have any opposing views? Like, okay, I do not understand this, I do not agree with this. I think that you can say. I guess that people are thinking too hard.
I think when he eulogizes shameless discourses and indecent, like going back to that age where everything was very open, you know, the communication was very open and talking about sexuality was very open. But I think there has to be some sort of restraint if we see it in present context. So he's very vague about it, like what should be decent and what should not be decent. So I think his vagueness is what is
Vagueness you find in
Yeah,
everything.
vagueness.
Yeah.
Another thing I was thinking was that he kind of tries to see the society as a whole. Like he said that he tries to point out the hypocrisy of the society. It's the same society that represses, but the same society who talks about it. I was thinking that society is made up of segments. Some are repressing, some are talking about it. So this is something I could think of as a critique that he may not be thinking completely in some sense. I was thinking of it.
I think that's particular. Okay, again, I love Foucault, but not to the extent that okay, I will not critique him. Two things. One is of course he is of course talking about but I think that's because of the method, the kind of field he is also part of, which is largely philosophy. So maybe one of that, that you know in philosophy you think of everything in a much more larger sense, right? I mean, who is here from philosophy?
You know that word.
No, he left.
Okay.
Joseph was left.
Okay. I mean, you look at superstructures
Yeah.
and all
Macro
those things,
things.
macro things. So maybe. And the question of critique and also when, and I hope, and I'm sure there are critiques of Foucault, but one of the interesting ways of doing critique is when you are reading a author, try not to read the author from present context. Try to situate him at his time. Because that's you will understand them much better then. And when you have to critique them, you can't critique them okay from the present context. Then of course, then it will be a very easy critique. Okay, you know, then you can say, oh, Foucault is not right about this, Foucault is not right about that. When you have to critique Foucault, you have to situate him in his historical context. You have to look at the figures around him, with him he was interacting, and think that whether other people were speaking much more progressive things than him. And if they did, why didn't Foucault take it? That's where the critique will lie. Hegel ka jaise critique hai by Sheila Ben-Habib. Hegel has this fantastic piece on women where he says that, and when I say fantastic, please take it with a pinch of salt. And I'm completely being sarcastic. And Hegel says that, oh, women are passive, they're like plant. And men are active, they are like animals. And he says it, like it's blatantly there. And Sheila Ben-Habib, when she critiques Hegel, she doesn't critique from the present context. The way she critiques Hegel is, she goes into Hegel's history and then she looks at the figures who were present in Hegel's life and how Hegel was sort of, he did have some issues with certain figures in his life. Some of them were women. And she critiques him through that route because that's a much more, I don't know the right word, but I'm forgetting the word anyway. That's the way to, I would prefer that's the way to critique somebody. To situate them in a historical context and then critique. Because otherwise तो बहुत आसान हो जाता है. अगर जब हम लोग अपने माँ बाप के साथ भी हमारा झगड़ा होता है तो हम ये करते हैं ना कि आपको पता नहीं है कि अभी समय कितना बदल गया है. Of course बदल गया है, but I think we also have to take into account the fact that जब हमारे जो माँ बाप है उनकी भी परवरिश एक पर्टिकुलर टाइप के इन्वायरमेंट में हुई है, हमारा अलग हुआ है, एंड वहाँ पे वो डिफरेंस लाई कर रहा है. सो व्हेन वी हैव टू टॉक, लाइक एट लीस्ट आई मेक श्योर जब आई एम टॉकिंग टू देम, आई talk to them and try to situate myself in their particular historical context and then talk to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just have one point to just mention. When we are talking Foucault and being a fan of Foucault at the same time, we should also remember that Foucault has been questioned and he has been accused in the Me Too movement of sexual harassment, sexually harassing small kids in Tunisia. So when we are dealing with intellectuals who are or have been predators or who have who have been accused of sexual violence or domestic violence or marital negligence, so when we are talking to these people, specifically these people in feminism, in discourse of feminism, we should also keep in mind what they are saying and what they are practicing in their lives. And Foucault's view on sexuality, on one point, that his view on sexuality are so, I don't know is the correct term, liberated, that he views children as being having the agency to consent to sex. He doesn't think, he and his contemporary at the same time, they perceive the children as having the agency that they can consent to sexual acts and being involved in it, and there should not be a law against it. So that is one thing that we should keep in mind.
Yeah, that makes everything.
And also when we are thinking of being a fan of Foucault.
That makes everything more complicated.
Just last point, one more thing. So if we believe this time currently where we are, a lot of talk on sexuality, there is knowledge production taking place. So this understanding of modernity, are we moving towards more liberating future? Like is like opening up space for sexual minorities to talk on sexuality becoming so norm. So is this new modernity, is this moving progressively towards
Also coming up with, doing away with certain regulations, accepting the fact that sex is also a work now.
Sexual work has been accepted. Yeah.
Yes.
And one more was on caste. Like if Foucault makes sense to somebody who's studying caste. Is there some link?
I have a question. That's very basic, and that is the motto I came here. What the feminism is, if we read it about feminism, we can see that it is a series of movements for women rights. But in the current situation, it is being a thought. So, what is modern feminism is? Or what is modern feminism in Indian context, especially because not every thought is true for every area.
True.
So what is feminism in Indian context, and what is modern feminism in Indian context?
I think people can answer it. We have
I'll respond
we had some
after.
discussion. Yeah.
अगर feminist movement की इतिहास की बात करें, if we look at the history of feminist movement, you will see the movements have been divided in terms of the kind of questions the feminists were asking at that time. First wave is suffragist movement and all those things. The second wave in the 1970s, and then third wave, which people are saying right now is going. It's an extended third wave. Second wave के बाद there was a lot of discussion whether there will be a third wave or not, whether it's a fourth wave. So in the present context, if you ask me, I will say it's too early to answer this question. What kind of modern feminist movement we are part of right now? Maybe after some time we will be able to answer this question, that because अभी we are right now in the moment. अभी कोई ये सवाल पूछ रहा है, कभी कोई वो सवाल पूछ रहा है, and because of social media there is too much of noise.
Yeah, right.
There is no
Too much of noise.
coherent thought जो अभी तक develop हुआ है, that which we can say right now that okay, these are the primary questions that the scholars are asking right now. Maybe after some time, people will be able to answer that question.
Okay. Can I respond to
Yeah.
that? So basically, as you know that there are a lot of scholars not here in India, but in West, people are thinking as to how in the second wave, academia and especially women's studies department and feminist studies department started. Now during that era, what happened? A conversation on basically sex and gender started, but it and then so focus was on sex, but the gender part was not into consideration. And this is how in 1990s Judith Butler, when we think the start of third wave, it's Judith Butler's work in 1990 coming up, and we thinking about what exactly is gender then, and then the distinction between sex and gender started. Now the academia that with coming of Judith Butler's work, discourses on women being the subject was being questioned. Like how can just women be the question in the feminist discourse? The question now shifted to other genders as well, with the work of Judith Butler. Now, and they discarded the second wave movement altogether, that women should only be the subject in the feminist discourse. And a lot of people during that era said that we are not feminists. We are thinking about gender, so we are not feminists. That was a movement, not here in India, but yeah, back in the Western countries. A lot of Western scholars now these days, they are saying that we are going back to after this whole discussion in the fourth wave. It's just the start of the fourth wave. We are going back to that academic setup where scholars, when they were questioning about these aspects, it's coming back. And the universities and spaces like these, the discourses, and as he said, that we have not arrived to that question. We are still questioning. Like, is it just the notions that we are thinking? So, linking to that question again, that he asked, and I responding it back, that whether merely saying that sex is a work, giving them some rights, or doing away with certain, or decriminalizing a certain section of it's 378, 377, sorry, doing a decriminalizing basically. So, are we actually understanding the notion of sexuality? Are we actually understanding these very how do I say, fluid concepts which are also developing? So this is a question I think we are still struggling with, and feminists in the contemporary era is struggling.
Adding to that, in the recent time, there has been good scholarship which has been written about neoliberal feminism and post-feminism. So, for example, a very fantastic example of post-feminism and neoliberal feminism is Viredi Wedding.
I haven't seen.
Okay, the film Viredi Wedding is a fantastic example of neoliberal feminism and post-feminism. So, watch it at your own risk. It's bad.
Yeah.
पर एक चीज़ है, जैसे कि अगर इनका सवाल और भी ज़्यादा इवन इफ अगर हिस्ट्री नहीं पता फेमिनिज्म, और समटाइम्स वी डोंट वांट टू गेट इनटू अकेडमी, इट्स ओके, पर अब ये समझ तो बन गई है कि जेंडर इक्वालिटी को डिनाई नहीं कर सकता. सो आवर फेमिनिस्ट मूवमेंट, मुझे ऐसा लगता है, कंप्लीटली रॉन्ग, पर वी आर इन द सेंटर, वी आर इन द प्रोसेस ऑफ फेमिनिस्ट मूवमेंट स्टिल. मतलब उसको हम नेम नहीं कर पा रहे हैं बिकॉज वी आर क्वेश्चनिंग. जैसे कि शाहीन बाग मूवमेंट है लेड बाय वुमेन. सो अब जो है सवाल रिलीजन का, कास्ट का, आइडेंटिटी का मिला के साउथ एशिया में जैसे ऐसे रीजनल मूवमेंट्स होती हैं जिनको फेमिनिस्ट मूवमेंट का पार्ट दे सकते हैं. और दूसरी चीज़, लिंकिंग इट टू द फर्स्ट रीडिंग विद सीइंग लाइक ए फेमिनिस्ट, तो कॉन्शियसनेस आ गई है कि अब जेंडर इक्वालिटी को आप डिनाई नहीं कर सकते हो. तो दिस हैज बिकम द न्यू नॉर्म, सो टू से, कि मेन बॉयज बीइंग पार्ट ऑफ डिस्कशंस जहाँ पे हम लोग फेमिनिस्ट इक्वालिटी की बात कर रहे हैं. तो दिस इज अ पार्ट ऑफ द मूवमेंट इटसेल्फ, मे बी सटल.
Yeah. Also, to what extent? I mean, there's only a very specific section of men who are doing it.
Yeah.
And then they are also misreading sometimes. And we need to also think about them. They are misreading and mislocating the notion of feminism altogether. There are people who are doing it.
Conflicting.
And another simple thing you need to keep in mind is there's no one kind of feminism. There are multiple discourses, multiple theories, multiple thoughts sprouting up at the same time. You cannot just say, point in one direction, say this is the feminism right now. That's happening.
एक लिटिल कंफ्यूजन है. जो जेंडर न्यूट्रलिटी का जो कॉन्सेप्ट है, वो masculine idea है या फिर feminist idea है?
Gender neutrality मतलब in what context?
Gender neutrality means like in buses there should not be like buses for women. In metro there should not be, because everyone is a neutral gender. There should not be specific reservations or
Yes, sir.
specific
Gender neutral
positive
bathrooms.
affirmative actions taken for women. That is what he said. It's not a feminist idea. Feminists always criticize gender neutrality. Yeah.
Which is again coming from a position of power. You're saying that.
Yeah, it's
You
a
know,
very
you're
ableist
coming-
position.
It's like
You-
upper
you
caste
already-
denying caste name कि हम लोग caste की क्या
Yeah.
जरूरत है, छोड़ देते हैं. Only somebody who can in a privileged position can say that he caste neutrality or gender neutrality.
I'll ask one question to everyone, which is, do you all think that women's movement and feminist movement are the same thing?
Good question. Yes, Apapa, the first question.
I think women's movement is a very specific thing, and there are strands of women's movement. Like there has been a women's movement in some northeastern states where against Afghan. Some because one incident happened, there was a young woman who was raped, and after that, the old women, what they did, they came out naked against the police, the army, against came out. Yeah, they came out naked because and the army is raping us. That's what the ban. So that is one thing that could be considered or could be put into the category of women's movement. When we are talking about feminism or feminist movement, it's an entire range of activities. It's not just a specific movement. It's also thoughts that we are working on. It's also the discourses that we are trying to develop. And it's not just women who are involved in it. It's also men who are involved in it. It's also other genders and other orientations that are involved in it. Feminist movement talks about queer identities, LGBTQ identities, and all those things. Like it is a very giant like meta narrative. Okay, and there are small specific strands that are developing in it. So it cannot be categorized as same thing. According to me, I'm not very sure about
No,
this.
you're right. So
That's the beauty.
all women's movements are not feminist movements necessarily. Women also fight for things which are very much against the ideas of feminism. So
Sometimes.
yeah. So, but that's a good question.
If we talk about feminism, feminist people talk about equality. Then why not equalitarian? What feminism?
Why not feminism?
Yeah.
वही तो thought है कि what the true feminism is.
You're in the process of taking a stand whether you belong to feminist or not. आप उसको समझने की कोशिश
अगर
करो.
मैं इक्वालिटी के बारे में बात करता हूँ तो मैं फेमिनिस्ट कैसे हूँ एक इक्वल राइट्स की बात करने वाला इंसान न होने के अलावा.
अच्छा उसके
Let her answer.
Yes,
No, I just simplify his question because we were discussing this last evening and that's how he's here.
ठीक है.
So, he's like feminism is equality for all. Like it doesn't really talk about women per se. Men का equality भी हम उसमें consider करते हैं all that, right?
ठीक है.
तो उसमें femi word क्यों है फिर?
हाँ.
That's what he's confused about.
Okay.
That's a question. Is the third way
Yeah,
people
just
give.
we can counter question that back. Do you think men and women are at par in the present society?
No.
Women are lower.
Yes.
So, do we want to bring men down or do we want to bring women up?
I want to bring women up.
Yeah. So we have to keep the focus on women
But
first.
there are other genders also.
Yeah. We are slowly now. The name is there. We are bringing everyone in. Like I'll say one thing. Like this center is called Center for Women's Studies. You know there are questions on that also. It should be called Center for Gender Studies. There are many in abroad. The institutions their centers are called Centers for Gender and Sexuality Studies. We haven't yet gone there, but we're in the process of improving. So your question has legitimacy. I understand, but we're working on that. But we still cannot keep women entirely out of the question because that is our starting point. That is their position we need to improve, and with them, there are other gender minorities. That's
अगर इसका नाम फेमिनिज्म नहीं होता तो इसके लिए क्या होता? Like that's also that could be the question. Equalism. ठीक है.
Equity before equality.
Equity before equality. ठीक है.
नहीं मतलब I'm just answering this question like equity before equality, like women are not up to the you can say as equal as men are in the society right now. So to bring them up to the level of when there is equity being provided, I guess. I can be wrong, but
That's the same question that third wave feminist asked. Same question was asked, like why is it that the women are only the subject? Why are other genders not the subject into the feminist movement? I think we are still struggling with it, and that's why the name, again, this is very much how we name things and how we have ascribed meanings to those names. It started with women, and slowly and steadily we have reached to a point where we can openly talk about other genders. So we need to see the trajectory also over there. That's why the name Femi is still there in the feminism, and women still remains the locus through which we are looking at different genders. It's not that we are denying the fact. We are looking at intersectionalities. We are looking at not just the intersection of being a woman, but also, say, a lesbian woman or a Dalit lesbian woman. We are looking at these
We
aspects.
owe it to the history because historically it is led by women, started by women. That's how I made peace with it. कि हम अब आए हैं. We can't take the space and acknowledge कि हमें equality चाहिए. Historically, through waves, people have struggled, women have struggled, women leaders, their own stories. So it comes out of a reaction to that कि आज हम यहाँ पे आके बोल पा रहे हैं कि equality होनी चाहिए.
वो सफेजेट अगर शुरू नहीं होता ना, तो फिर ये अभी वो जो फूको जब फ्रॉइड का मूवमेंट नहीं होता, then we could not have been here where we are reading Foucault or the text by Butler.
एक आर्टिकल है छोटा सा 6-7 पेज का by this person called Todil Mohi.
Exactly.
It's called How Feminism Became the F Word. I think it's available Google page. Just search How Feminism Became the F Word. Todil Mohi. Read that.
हाँ जी आपका.
Yeah, I have a point here. Like you said that since women are in bottom of the society or men are in the upper, so in order to improve her situation, we need to pull women up, right? So is it that we are keeping the situation of the men constant and pulling women up, or at the same time men's position will also change in the society as the society progresses? So it doesn't mean that in this process always we will find that men will be in a position where women can't reach, because simultaneously women's situation are also changing. It is not that we are keeping men constant. So if we are changing women's situation, simultaneously men's situation is also changing. Their way of repressing women will also change.
Yeah.
So how we will we address these situations?
Yeah, that's a very good question.
Because I got this idea because I'm student of economics. So when we study two countries and their development paths, so the way a developing country is growing, if we try to project their historical trajectory, developmental trajectory. So I am giving the example of Zimbabwe. So the way Zimbabwe is progressing currently, if at the same rate Zimbabwe will progress, it will take around 746 years to reach at the level of US.
Okay.
So same process will happen basically in like we talk about developed countries, we talk about developing countries. So always there will be a gap. We cannot fulfill that gap.
Because US will keep
Yeah,
progressing.
always it is not that US is keeping their position constant.
Yeah, right.
US is also progressing changing their positions and technology. They are reaching to the higher level of technology. Still we are also progressing, but the speed is not high, not the same for both the countries. So how to
bridge the gap?
Yeah, how to bridge the gap?
Can I just respond to it in a different manner?
Yeah.
Asking the question, what is developing and what is developed again? This is a very Western concept which these people have given, right? For Zimbabwe, for all these third world countries, the notion of a development or being a developed country might be
Then
different.
one idea you have to match the idea
Yes,
of previous.
exactly. So you're thinking about US as a developed nation or thinking about England as a developed nation, again we need to question, because our notion, one has to develop our own concept of what we think of development is all about, or what we think what is developed.
Okay, let's say
his example is different, but the point is making is men और women का gap कैसे कम होगा?
that is-
हाँ तो वो central question है.
I just draw an analogy
आदमी भी grow कर रहा है.
that how we can address this
Yeah, I
situation.
understand.
It's like in your point what you are saying that develop and developing.
His question is very basic, very practical कि कैसे खत्म होगा.
Yeah.
हाँ.
That makes sense, yeah.
कैसे खत्म होगा?
Basically, when we talk about developing, let's forget about developing words. We will not use these words, but how we will
But
come
no,
to
I
the
understand
situation.
your point.
Ah.
Yes. And yeah,
Anybody can respond.
I mean, just answering what जो आपने खुद कहा, that how, say for example, even the history of masculinity will be, say for example, 700 years from now, हमें पता नहीं है. It can be for the better, it can be for the worse.
yeah.
We don't know. So या तो ग्राफ ऊपर भी जा सकता है, ग्राफ नीचे भी आ सकता है. So you, I mean, again, it's too early.
Or might be that there will always be a tussle between these two powers.
There will be. And even like when I responded, I was just giving a general idea. But of course, men and women not homogeneous categories. Not all men are here. There are Dalit men, there are lower class men who are lower than many women who are. But तो वो वाला tussle हमेशा रहेगा. So there's no clear cut answer to this, you know. But yeah, good question. I think we should try that.
We'll end this. I make last point बोल दो उसके बाद मैं खत्म कर दूँ. क्योंकि बहुत ही practical question है. I'm just comparing it with caste का difference कि upper caste और lower caste का difference कैसे कम होगा, उसके लिए क्या कर सकते हैं. उसी तरह से men और women का जो difference है, अगर इसी रेट से बढ़ते रहे तो गैप भी बढ़ता रहेगा, कम नहीं होगा. That's your question ना, basic question की कैसे खत्म होगा men और women का गैप.
No, that his question is अगर अभी चीजें बदल रही तो वो रिप्रेशन करने का तरीका भी बदलेगा men का.
Yeah.
हाँ तो इसीलिए ना खाली मेरी अंडरस्टैंडिंग है कि जो हम बात करते हैं कि औरतों को ऊपर उठाना, औरतों को ऊपर उठाना, वो ऐसा नहीं करना है. मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि जहाँ पे हम हैं, जिस लोकेशन पे भी हम हैं, if men are there, so if they can come down if they feel they are upstep, तो अगर यहाँ से 2 स्टेप ऊपर आएगा तो ऊपर 2 स्टेप नीचे हम भी आ सकते हैं. कुछ प्रिविलेजेस को देने का तरीका वो हमें ढूंढना होगा. क्लियर? अगर यहाँ and you know how privileges could be given away, तो गैप जल्दी कम हो जाएगा. This is
But again, there is a question that will this patriarchal society, so-called men, willing to give that power, or are they willing to come themselves down? That's the question.
I want to make one point. जैसे जो Me Too movement हुआ था, उसके बाद बहुत सारे लोगों ने वुमेन को नहीं दिया, काम ही नहीं दिया, उनको वो रखते ही नहीं थे. अगर हम हॉलीवुड की बात करें तो बहुत सारे जो फीमेल थी, जो मेन इसमें थी, उनको हटा दिया, फिर उनको काम ही नहीं दिया कि अगर इन केस अगर फ्यूचर में ऐसी कुछ चीज़ होती तो हमारे पे वो आ जाएगा, तो उन्होंने काम ही नहीं दिया उनको, मतलब उनको वहाँ से कट डाउन ही कर दिया. तो अगर औरतें वो आवाज़ भी उठाती है तो ऐसे सप्रेस करने का है एक तरीका. आप डायरेक्टली नहीं करोगे लेकिन इनडायरेक्ट वे में तो कर ही रहे हैं, तो हो रहा ही है. मतलब ये आपका क्वेश्चन वैलिड है.
स्पेसेस डेवलप करना पड़ेगा.
Definitely.
विमेन को आगे बढ़ के ऑल्टरनेट स्पेसेस डेवलप करना पड़ेगा.
बट डोमिनेंट प्लेसेस के ऊपर तो अभी फिलहाल मेन ही होते हैं.
Exactly.
how to give up privileges वाला सवाल आता है. If you are born with some privileges, how to give up? Men की अपनी privileges हैं.
I think it will take time. ऐसे नहीं होगा वो.
I'll just start with the family. Family is good. It's also a battle worth fighting. Like at least for me, I felt that it might not be same for everyone.
आई थिंक हमारी फैमिली को तो शायद टाइम भी लगेगा चेंज करने में, एंड अब चेंज करके थोड़ा सा ही टाइम बचा है, तो इट्स बेटर कि हम लोग अब स्टार्ट करें हमसे.
At least we can consult. If we cannot change them, we can consult. I think changing someone is very difficult. Even we ourselves cannot change our behavior very immediately.
एंड चेंज लॉन्ग लास्ट नहीं रह सकता. अगर आपको खुद से लग रहा है तो ही आप वो प्रोसेस में ला सकते हो. अगर आपको खुद से लग रही है वो चीज़, मैं बताऊंगी तो शायद आपको नहीं लगेगा कि वो आपको करना है. आप प्रैक्टिस कर लोगे बट फिर उसके बाद आप छोड़ दोगे उस चीज़ को.
जो इनका पॉइंट है ना कि इक्वालिटी की बात करते हैं, इक्वालिटी घर में लाना कितना मुश्किल है. वही चैलेंज है. Nearly impossible.
But okay, this conversation will never end. It can go on forever. It has been going on for ages, but we need to stop for now because our time is way beyond where we expected. But good that this conversation lasted for so long. Good that you made things so easy for us. For Foucault, I guess there are so many people here, even me, who have been trying to understand Foucault for so long. He showed us like ऐसे देखना कैसे, how to read. When you get that, everything becomes easier. That applies for all the reading. So that is very helpful. Shivani, thank you. Thank you everyone for coming.